Now for the electronic side of this radio. I've got some mixed news so far. As one of my very observant viewers pointed out, this device didn't look right. And he was absolutely correct. There was a break in that wire. This is actually a wire-wound power resistor. And I guess I've been pretty lucky up until now in that. All the radios I've worked on, these have been good. But luck has finally run out. It's hard to say what happened to it. At first, I was speculating that somebody tried to plug the radio in, and the electrolytic capacitors were shorted, and it took this out, but it does not look charred at all. Maybe it was chewed through, but I really didn't see any evidence of rodent activity in the rest of the radio. So, I don't know. At any rate, it's going to have to be replaced. Not sure with what, though. Possibly I could get one of those adjustable power resistors like I showed in this RCA 630TS. Big ceramic power resistor with an exposed area in the wires where you can adjust the tap. Or I'll just use two discrete power resistors. So it should be 32 ohms and 235. If I was to get a single with a tap, let's see, that value would be 267. I'm not going to find anything quite like that. Probably 300. Well, no, maybe I could get a 270. Huh. Yeah, if I could get a 270 with an adjustable tap, that would probably be a very nice solution, because I could get one that would be virtually identical to this size and reuse this mounting lug. I'll have to dig through what I've got that just might have something on hand. Otherwise, I'll just use a discrete, probably 33 ohm and whatever I can get close to that, maybe 240, 250, 235 is not exactly an off-the-shelf value. As for the wattage rating, I don't know. I tried doing some research online. It seems to be kind of a mystery as to the wattage ratings on these. These guys you can guesstimate pretty much a half watt will do for any of these standard dog bones. Bigger guy like this, go with 2 watts, you'll be fine. Alright, so that's the bad news. Now that got me worried that maybe the power transformer could be damaged. So I got on my ohm meter and started doing resistance checks, because the schematic very conveniently has resistance readings for all the coils in the radio. So I started checking, and as you can see, I've marked some of them in yellow, meaning those are good. It's a primary, high voltage secondary, rectifier, all look good. I haven't checked this one yet. Well, that got me encouraged. I then went on to check what are notorious for always being bad. As you can see if you watch my Philco 60L restoration series, which is virtually an identical chassis. I had all kinds of fun restoring that, including these coils being open. Very similar looking to these inside. And these primaries are very often open because this plastic collar in between the two swells, cracks, deteriorates over time, which snaps this. But amazingly, everything checks out dead on all the coils I've checked so far. Still have this one to go, but this one doesn't have that same type of construction. So I don't know. I guess I just got lucky. Yeah, I don't know if you can kind of see down in there. This is one of those coils where there's a primary and a secondary winding. Now this is an early generation 60 chassis. There were numerous incarnations over the years. I found this on the, I think it's philcoradio.com or something to that effect. They have a whole section devoted to the Philco 60, and it's, I think, 2 or 3 year production run and all the various changes. Well, this is the second production run, which was, I think, early 34, and that seems to match mine correctly. If you watch my 60L restoration series, you'll see one of the differences is that there's a paper cap up in here. Well, this doesn't have that. For that matter, other than this being burned open and the electrolytics having been replaced. Everything else looks to be original, and so far everything I've checked is good. Oh wait, no, I shouldn't say that. I think the power switch volume control has also been replaced, which may be a good thing, because in my other Philco 60, when I restored that, I had to replace this. Doesn't feel so good though. Kind of rough. This might actually be a wire wound pot, I'm not sure. I can spray some deoxit in there, maybe that'll loosen it up. But all this stuff looks to be all original. And as for the electrolytic, it was replaced with the correct type of cap. This is a dual 8 microfarad 450 volt. It was wired in fairly nicely. So, I guess way back when this radio got a little bit of work done. I'm sure that's when this happened. Also, another very observant viewer noted that the speaker had been reconed. Now, of course, I have no idea who reconed this or when they might have done it, but they did an excellent job. What tipped him off was the felt cover. Here's another speaker from a very similar era. This is from my 15DX from 32, whereas this radio is from 34. So normally they would have a spider like that with a bolt. It's tempting to pry up this felt cap to see what's under there, because I can feel that 1/4-inch nut right down in there, and I'm wondering, is the old spider still there or not? I say that because it's got a new spider, the more modern style, down below, which would look something like that on a larger speaker. So as I say, very, very well done. I didn't even occur to me that it might be reconed when I first saw it. No rubbing whatsoever. It's got great movement, so I'm hoping it'll sound just fine. So what else? Unfortunately, this chassis did suffer a bit of damage in shipping. Dial lamp assembly and dial pointer got smashed forward. That's what took out this dial. That's why there's a big chunk missing here. I've already bent them back to where they're not rubbing anymore. And there are numerous places to sell reproduction dials, so that won't be a problem. Bulb was already missing, but I should be able to dig one up. And it's a bit corroded on top and here. In fact, the chassis was a bit corroded too, but I already went ahead and put some naval jelly on it and got rid of the rust. The worst spot was down in here. A few other spots down in there. I've gotten most of it out. So the only thing I'm really not happy about right now is the missing capacitor. Because I like to restuff these, or at least retain the original look, whether I put the caps down below or restuff these. And it turns out these are actually really tough to find. If you hop onto eBay and search for like vintage radio filter capacitor or something like that, you'll be hard pressed to find any, and the ones you do are generally quite expensive. Originally, this may even have had some copper Mershan caps. Not sure it's quite old enough for that though, but those would look something like this. Should look amazing. Fortunately, I only have one spare of these, so I guess for now I could go with maybe this and one of these, but that would look kind of odd. So if anybody has any caps to sell, whether they're aluminum or copper, let me know. In the meantime, I'll just tack a couple new caps down below. So I think this is actually going to be a pretty quick restoration. I'll keep my fingers crossed anyways. Unlike my Philco 60L restoration, I'm not going to go into such excruciating detail on recapping and molding new dog bone resistors and, and all that. I think this will go pretty quick. What I'm going to try to do on the Bakelite blocks is what I did with my 3862 recently, which was to leave them wired in as much as is practical. Take out the nut, rotate them around, scoop out the insides and wire in some new caps, and then just rotate them back and remount them. And that's where all the caps are. There are no discrete paper caps in this. They're all inside the Bakelite blocks, and then I believe there are 4 inside of this aluminum box here. That, I think, will be the biggest challenge. It's held in by 1/4 inch nuts down here, and I think perhaps another one up top underneath all these wires. There are a bunch of thin wires coming out of it, so it's a little bit awkward to get at and get out and restuff, but I will do it. The first thing I want to do with this radio is make sure that the power transformer is still good. Even though it ohms out alright, I want to actually check the voltages. So in order to do that, I will pull out the rectifier tube, meaning there's no voltage going here, and I don't need to worry about that bad bias resistor. It's just going to be applying power to the tube filaments. Just to these tubes in particular, these 4. But in order to do that, I want to replace this capacitor because it's right on the AC line. I've seen these capacitors pop. That's that guy right down there. I've seen some sets where a side of this Bakelite block is actually blown open. And of course I want to replace the power cord. So power cord coming in here, or what's left of it, going to this tie point here and to the cap here. This tie point then goes over to the power switch, I believe, which is up here. So if I replace that cap, pull out the rectifier tube, I should be able to safely power this set up, and these tube filaments should light up. I finished rebuilding this Bakelite block with an AC line rated safety capacitor, and I've temporarily wired in a modern power cord. Later on I'll use a vintage type. And I've connected my AC voltmeter across the plates of the rectifier tube. I should get probably around 600 volts AC if all is well, and the tube should light up. Now, unfortunately, I just created a little problem for myself. I dug up some Philco knobs to put on this radio so I can manipulate the controls, and I noticed that the tone control shaft was bent. Well, I tried straightening it out, and what do you know, it snapped clean off. So, I'll be on the lookout for a replacement. Now, not the end of the world, tone control, I rarely even manipulate that, and it's really just an on-off switch anyways. I'm sure I can dig up something suitable to replace it with. Just a rotary on-off switch is all I need, with the right type of shaft. Oh well. So I'll turn this on now and let's see what happens. Right. A bit more voltage than I thought. My meter's not happy because that's pretty. That's approaching the limits of the meter. So I'm going to disconnect it. No, that's because there's no load on it. With a load, that will drop a bit. I'll turn it back on now just to make sure the tubes are lighting up. And yeah, they are. Cool. So I imagine that AC line, or rather this voltage was higher than I expected, not only because there's no load on that part, but there's also no rectifier tube, which the filament on draws quite a bit of current too. Those two loads combined will drop down the output on this a bit. Alright, so well, let's try with the tone control. I'll ask around, maybe somebody's got one to spare. In the meantime though, I can certainly continue on with the rest of the restoration. So first up, I'm going to try to dig up something to replace those two sections with. And actually, I might only need to replace one section at 235. Actually, I haven't checked this section. This section might still be good. Let's take a quick look at that. Alright, cool. That is good. So I actually only have to replace the other side. And I probably got something around 220 or 250 I can slap in there. I finished rebuilding this Bakelite block, but when it came to this one, I figured I would completely unmount it. Not so much for restuffing, but to get out of the way of these three nuts. That's what holds in the tuning capacitor. I want to remove that so that I can replace these rotting rubber mounts. So there was one grounding wire soldered directly to this bolt, so I unsoldered that, and I unsoldered two wires on the other side going to the two sections on the capacitor, unmounted the dial lamp, so it's all ready to come out once I take off those three bolts. As rubber mounts go, these actually aren't that bad considering how old they are. In particular, the three on the top side of the chassis are still pretty pliable. And down below, this one's kind of in between. And this one's still pretty soft, but this one is really nasty and grungy and rock hard. So I figure if I'm going to replace one, I might as well replace all of them. Here are a few possibilities I've collected over the years for various projects. I think that I'll go with these. Now, the originals were in two sections, one below, one above. I think you can use these, you just have to kind of squish it and force it through the chassis holes. While I have the capacitor out, I'm also cleaning up the chassis where it sits. Use a little navel jelly and then some naphtha, some type of ooze that, or probably tar that leaked out of the transformer over the years, so this area was discolored, so the naphtha cleaned that up well, and then the navel jelly cleaned off the cadmium corrosion around that area. Now as for the capacitor, I sprayed it down with some contact cleaner to just clean off all the surfaces. And then I took off two little screws that hold this bearing plate on, which allowed me to pull out the tuning shaft. See, it's got that little rounded part there. Well, that rides against three bearings, and that provides a planetary drive, meaning that one rotation of this shaft only gives a small amount of turning on this shaft. So while I had that out, I sprayed it down to WD-40 to flush out all the old dried grease and dirt and grime, and now I'm applying some new lithium grease to the bearing surfaces, and then I will reassemble it, and it should operate quite smoothly, I hope. Alright, I finished packing the bearings on the front, and it's working fairly well. But there's also a bearing point on the back I want to take a look at. So there's three screws here. I believe the way this works is the two outer ones hold this plate on. There's a bearing point here, and this screw you adjust to adjust the tension on the actual shaft here. So let's take this all apart. I think there might be a single ball bearing in there. And if so, I want to put a little grease on it. These screws were pretty stiff, so I sprayed a little penetrating oil on them a moment ago. Oh, there we go. Okay, so that just... You can leave this one attached and the whole plate will rotate. And there's that single ball bearing I was talking about. And yeah, it's pretty dirty down in there. Oops. So... flush it out with some WD-40. There goes the ball bearing, and don't want to lose that. Get some Q-tips in there. I don't know if that's corroded or dirt or what, but it's kind of nasty. I'll try some naphtha, see if that dissolves it any better. Looks like it's brass, so I don't think it's corrosion. On the other hand, it doesn't really matter because the bearing surface is clean. So you see that whole center part rotates. A little ball bearing sits in there. Alright, so a little dab of grease. Bearing back in. Slide the plate over. Get those screws back in there. Alright, now that one in the middle I left very loose. So it actually feels alright like that, but try tightening it down a little more. It's actually a nut on the other side too, so this plate is threaded, but there's also a nut on the other side. It seems kind of odd. I need to hold that nut while I'm tightening the screw. It's not bad. Tighter. Yeah, it's feeling pretty good. Try a little more. I think I might have gone a little too far. The shack is harder to turn as you tighten this up. Yeah, that's pretty good right there. Alright, so I'm going to get those rubber mounts secured into the chassis. I'll have to do it from the other side. So they look like this, and it's pretty tough. If you try to mush the big side in from the top down, it's easier to mush from the bottom up and get the small part worked up from the other side. I've been making pretty good progress on the radio. I have the tuning capacitor remounted and wired back in, and I've rebuilt 1, 2, 3, 4 Bakelite blocks so far. Now I'm turning my attention to this guy, which I think will be the most challenging. What I plan on doing right now is disconnecting each of the sections inside this box and tacking capacitors in where I can while this is out, so I can try powering up the radio. Once it's working, I will restuff this box, remount it, remove the temporary caps, and wire this back in. However, while doing so, I discovered something. I was pretty darn sure that this was the right schematic. Everything has been matching until I got to this. This is a representation of what's supposed to be inside that box. However, I don't have 4 wires coming out of it, I have 5. 2 of them I've already identified fine. One was going up here to the junction of these 2 resistors. That's the 0.5 microfarad cap. I've wired in a replacement here. That's this guy. The 0.05 I determined was this wire going over to this point. No problem. But then I realized, wait a minute, I don't have 2 more wires left, I have 3. And one of them is going right over to this guy, which has this funky looking thing here, which is actually a 200 ohm flexible resistor. I guess back then they weren't able to make dog bone type resistors of low resistance values, so all of these are like 25K, 10K, 50K, and up. But for when you get down to just a few hundred ohms, they went with this, which is sort of like a piece of resistance wire wrapped inside of some insulating material with 2 coiled ends on it. It actually measures okay. So that's this guy. And that's right across that capacitor, which is 0.18 microfarads. That's what's inside this box. Well, off of that, there's a wire that snakes around and goes inside this box. So I'm thinking there may be a later revision, I'll have to hop online and look, where they decided that 0.18 microfarads wasn't enough, and they took a 5th section inside that box and put it in parallel with this capacitor. But I don't know what that value is. So hopefully I can find it online and figure out what value that should be and put it in parallel with that guy. Now 0.18 is an oddball value, so I put in 0.22 microfarads. So I'm actually already exceeding what was originally called for. So if the additional capacitor in here wasn't very large, I might just be okay with the way it is right now. Otherwise I'll add whatever capacitor seems appropriate. Alright, I think I finally tracked down the right schematic. This version has 5 capacitors inside that block, plus it also has a trimmer capacitor from one of the IF coils that was not present in earlier models. So I then went ahead and replaced those 5 caps. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, those are just temporary till I rebuild that capacitor. And I also took out that replacement can and wired in temporarily an electrolytic down here and one up here, both. Or actually, this is an 8 microfarad Sprague Atom and 10 microfarad Michicon. So, oh, and I also bridged that burned out power resistor section. Again, a temporary fix. So I think this is ready to try powering up. I just need to reconnect the speaker, which I have right here. Wires were cut off, so I'll have to figure out which wire goes to what. Originally they were color coded, but those wires all look pretty much the same color to me now. Pretty darn frayed too, so I'll be replacing these wires entirely at some point. So as I mentioned before, this radio has been, the speaker rather, has been reconed, but I'm noticing that the spider's starting to separate here and there. So I think I'm going to need to get some glue in there. You can see that. But it should be good enough to try powering up.